This is the second part of the discussion of this 2022 A-Level Economics MCQ paper. Look at this question 26. Assume that in an economy, marginal propensity to consume out of the disposable income is 0.8. See that now, unlike in our previous question 24, here in this question, it is specifically mentioned that this marginal propensity to consume is just 0.8 from the total disposable national income. And that's why I earlier explained you that in question 24, this disposable income and the level of income both are same because we don't see any transfers or taxes in question 24. I explained that there. But unlike there in question 24, here in 26th one, they specifically say that this is 0.8 from the disposable national income. So if I explain that part, if your disposable national income, if YD is just 1, right? If disposable national income is just 1, from that 1, you spend 80 cents for consumption activities. But remember, it's from the disposable income, not from the income. Right. Look at the next part. And the government taxes all income at a constant rate of 25%. So this is a proportionate tax. If the person's income is Y, right, 25% will be the relevant tax percentage. From the income, we need to pay 25% as the tax. Right. The next part. If gross national income in this economy increases by 200 billion, okay, what get increased? Is it the disposable income or the national income? Remember, it's just the gross national income, not the disposable income, which means Y get increased by how much? 200. And the question asks us to calculate consumption, the amount of consumption in the economy, initial increase in consumption. Okay, so based on these data, see that now the marginal propensity to consume is 0.8 from your disposable income, and tax percentage is given to us as 25%. And if income increases by 200, they ask us to see what happens to the consumption. Okay, so this is what you need to do. You first need to develop a simple equation for consumption. Consumption is equal to, according to the question, based on the data given to us in the question, consumption will be 0.8 times your disposable income. And the problem, this disposable income is not given to us directly. And I told you disposable income is generally the income plus transfers minus taxes. But in this one, transfers are not available, so that we can write income minus tax is the disposable income. Right. Then income is Y, tax. For tax, look at the equation that I have developed. If your income is Y, 25% you need to pay as taxes. So that taxes will be 25% into Y, if not 0.25 into Y. So look at this equation now. I have developed a simple equation to calculate the disposable income. Disposable income is equal to income minus the taxes. When you simplify this, you get disposable income equals 0.75 into Y. How do we get this? See, the coefficient of this Y is 1. So 1 times Y minus 0.25 times Y. So the output will be 0.75 times Y. Right. Then this equation, right, I can take here. So consumption is equal to YD equals 0.75 into YD. Okay, so this is the new equation now. And according to the question, they say that Y increases by 200. If so, let's see the increase in consumption. 0.8 into 0.75 times Y is 200. That's the increase in Y. So 0.8 times 0.75 into 200 will be 150. So 150 into 0.8 will be 120. So this is the increase in consumption, initial increase in consumption, 120. Right. So we'll try to find that answer from the provided options. Right. 120 we have in the second option. So that's the correct answer for this question 26. Right. Now we will move to this question 27. Given a ratio, reserve ratio of 10%, which means SRR is 10%. So we will write it. SRR is 10%, which means 0.1. With fractional reserve banking system, what's the total amount of deposits resulting from a new deposit of 50 million according to the deposit multiplier? Very easy. This is all you need to do. So you just write the equation total deposits. This is a very simple equation. Total deposits equals, we write initial deposit times, right? Initial deposit times initial deposit into deposit multiplier, right? Deposit multiplier. So initial deposit is 50 into deposit multiplier is 1 over SRR. So 50 into 1 over SRR is 0.1. So 1 over 0.1 is 10. So that the total deposit will be how much then? 500. So answer for this question 27 is the first one. Look at this 28th question. Which of the following is not included in M2 definition of money supply? Okay, so what is this M2 definition of money supply? Let me show you. But before I show you the M2 definition, let me just write M1 definition. We write money supply, right? Money supply equals, what do we take first when developing this M1 definition of money supply? We take currency held by general public. Currency held by general public plus. Then we take the total value, total deposits maintained in demand deposits. So you write demand deposits in commercial banks, demand deposits, right? See that now the total of these two, currency held by the general public and the demand deposits, we just recognize as M1 money supply. And when you make this definition broader, when you convert this into M2 money supply, you need to additionally add savings and time deposits. Savings and time deposits. See, this part is just M1 money supply, and to this M1 money supply, when you add the savings and time deposits, what do we receive? We receive the M2 money supply. Okay. So finally, what are the components inside this M2 money supply? This is the first component inside the M2 money supply, the second component, and this is the third component. Right. Now, look at the question. The question asks us to recognize which is not a component in M2 money supply. Right. Let's try to recognize it. First one, currency held by general public. That's our first component. So that is included. Demand deposits held by the general public is also a component. So that's the second one that we have written in our equation. Third one, savings deposits held by the public. Yes, that's the third component. Fourth one, time deposits held by the public. Again, that is the third component. I have taken the two together when writing this third component. And then the fifth one, credit cards held by the public. No, this is not a component in M2 money supply. So this is the answer for this question 28. Right. Now we will move to this question 29. There it says, based on the equation of exchange, if y equals 500, m equals 400, v equals 5, we just need to find the value of p. These are very easy ones. So how do we develop this equation of exchange? We write money supply into velocity of money circulation equals price level into real output. But in this question, they have mentioned this real output as y. So let me just replace the t with y. Okay. If money supply is 400 and if velocity of circulation is 5, we just need to find p, and also they have given us y value. Y is 500. So simply p is equal to 400 into 5 over 500. So what happens when you simplify this thing? P is just 4. So price level in the economy is just 4. Right, now look at this 30th question. There it says, which of the following policies will close an inflationary gap? See, closing the inflationary gap. Closing the inflationary gap means removing this inflationary gap. So what's this inflationary gap? We can recognize it in this. Just imagine that this is the aggregate supply curve and this is the aggregate demand, and at this point what do we see? You see the aggregate demand needed to achieve this full employment level of national income, and if aggregate demand is greater than that, right, if the current aggregate demand is here, we see this inflationary gap, right? What do we see here? We see the inflationary gap, and the question asks us to recognize the policies which will support to reduce this inflationary gap. So in order to reduce the inflationary gap, you can do two things, right? You can do two things. So let me show you those two things in this way, right? Just imagine that if you somehow reduce the aggregate demand, see that now what happens to the aggregate demand curve? Then it drops, right? If the aggregate demand drops, what happens to the price level? Price level also drops, so that the inflation decreases. See, so that is just one option, right? So what is the first option? If you decrease this aggregate demand, you will be able to take the price level down. And at the same time, what if you try to increase your aggregate supply? See, aggregate supply curve, this is the original supply curve. And if you just try to increase this aggregate supply, see what happens. Then the aggregate supply increases, the supply curve gets shifted to the right side. And when the aggregate supply curve gets shifted to the right side, what happens? Again, the price level decreases. So that's the second possible option, right? So that either you can decrease the aggregate demand, if not, you can increase this aggregate supply. These are the two options, and we will now try to recognize which of the following, which of the given policies will either decrease the aggregate demand or increase the aggregate supply. දෙකෙන් එකක් වෙන්න ඕන. Right, now we will take these two somewhere here, then it's clearly visible for us. Right, now look at this one. Lowers reserve requirements and increase budget deficit. When the government lowers the reserve requirements, what will happen? Simply, the statutory reserve ratio is decreased. When the statutory reserve ratio is decreased, what happens to the amount of excess reserves? That increases. When the amount of excess reserves get increased, what happens to the ability to create credit? Ability to create credit also increases, and as a result, money supply in the economy increases, and then interest rate in the economy decreases. So that what will happen? Consumption will increase, investment will increase, and since these are the components of aggregate demand, when consumption and investment increase, what happens to the aggregate demand? Even the aggregate demand will increase. But what we needed to happen in the first place, we wanted this aggregate demand to reduce. But from this first option that they have given, what happens to the aggregate demand? That increases ultimately. So that this will worsen the inflationary gap. It will increase the inflationary gap. So answer is not the first one. And the second part of the first option says increasing budget deficit. See, increasing budget deficit means simply the government increases their purchases, government spending. So G is also a part of aggregate demand. So when budget deficit is increased, government purchases will increase, and as a result, aggregate demand also increases. So from both these, what happens to the aggregate demand? Aggregate demand will increase. So this is not the answer there. Second one, raise reserve requirement. See that now it's the opposite of the previous one. දැන් අර මම කලින් කියපු එකේ opposites කිව්වා කියලා ඔයා හිතන්න. හරිද? මම කලින් කියපු එකේ opposites කිව්වා කියලා හිතන්න. SRR is increased so that the excess reserves will decrease. Then ability to create credit decreases. Money supply decreases. Interest rates will increase. When interest rates are high, people will be reluctant to obtain loans and do their consumption. So consumption will be lower and they will not be willing to do the new investment. So investment will be lower. And then as a result, what will happen? Even the aggregate demand will be lower. And අපිට වමනාදේ වෙනවා. Again, from the first part of this second option, aggregate demand decreases. And look at the second one, lowers the discount rate. See, I told you we had this discount rate in a previous paper as well. This is the interest rate charged by the central bank when they offer loans to the commercial banks. So when they lower the discount rate, what happens in the economy? Interest rate, the general interest rate decreases. And when interest rate decreases, what happens again? This is about the interest rate. When interest rate is decreased, see what happens? Consumption increases, investment increases, and as a result, aggregate demand increases. See, we have two parts in the second option. From the first one, aggregate demand drops. It's true. But from the second policy that they have proposed, aggregate demand will increase. So this is not the answer. So that the second option will not be the answer. Third one, increase the money supply. See, if the money supply is increased, again, what will happen? Interest rates will be lower. See, ekama katandare. Money supply increases so that the interest rate will be lower. Consumption increases, investment increases so that the aggregate demand increases. එනිසා ඒක වෙන්න බෑ. මොකද අපිට වෙන්න ඕනේ ඒකේ අනිත් පැත්ත. So this is not the answer there. But look at the second one. Reduce government spending. See, reducing government spending means reducing the component G and increasing the tax revenue, right? Increasing the tax revenue and reducing government purchases. So this will, I mean, to a certain extent, this will reduce the aggregate demand. එතකොට දෙවණියට දීලා තියෙන suggestion එක that is really good. And the last one is decreasing taxes. See, when the tax rates are decreased, again, people will be spending more on consumption. එතකොට ආයමත් මොකද වෙන්නේ? Aggregate demand increases. එනිසා in the third option, we have three suggested policies, but only the second one will decrease the aggregate demand, not the first one or not the third one. Right, look at the fourth one now, decrease the money supply. එතකොට හරි. මොකද මම දැන් දෙතුන් පාරක්ම කිව්වා. When the money supply is decreased, interest rates get increased, and as a result, consumption, investment decrease, and as a result, aggregate demand decreases. So the first part is correct. Increasing taxes. See, I told you, if the tax rate is increased, then earlier I was explaining what will happen if the tax rate is decreased. Now, if the tax rate is increased, consumption will be reduced, right? So that will again decrease the aggregate supply. And the last option that they have suggested is to reduce the government spending. See, as I explained earlier, when the government spending is reduced, what will happen? Aggregate demand will further decrease. See, from all these suggestions, what will happen to the aggregate demand? Aggregate demand will definitely decrease. So this way we will be able to close this inflationary gap, right? So that's the answer for this question 30, but we will read the fifth option as well. Decrease the money supply. Okay, that is true. Decrease the tax rate. Now, if tax rates get decreased, consumption increases so that the money aggregate demand increases. First second is not the correct one. So that's a problem. Right. Look at this question 31. Which of the following will lead to an increase in money supply? Right. Look at the first one. Decrease in income tax rate. See that now. When the income tax rate is decreased, what happens to the currency held by the general public? Currency in circulation will be increased. That will be higher. Elisa, if you look at this M1 money supply definition, it consists of two components. The first one is currency held by general public. Currency held by general public plus demand deposits, right? Demand deposits. See what happens now when the income tax rate is decreased, currency held by the general public can increase so that this money supply will also increase, right? It will increase the money supply. True. Second one, a decrease in government budget deficit. See, decrease in the government budget deficit means decreasing the government purchases and increasing the government taxes. And when the government purchases get decreased, what happens? Money supply decreases. New money doesn't come to the economy. So it will reduce the money supply. So this is not the answer. Open market purchase of securities by the central bank. What does that mean? See, we have the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, and on the other side, we get the commercial banks. And now, central bank purchases treasury bills and treasury bonds, special treasury bonds from the commercial banks. See, and in return, central bank transfers cash to the commercial banks. Then what will happen to their reserves? Excess reserves will increase. When excess reserves get increased, ability to create credit will increase. Then money supply will increase. Clear? And then currency held by general public will also increase, right? So even from the third one, money supply increases. Fourth one says an increase in borrowings by the government issuing treasury bonds. See, increase in borrowings by the government. What will happen? If the government is going to issue or sell these treasury bonds to the commercial banks, then their reserves will decrease, then the ability to create credit will decrease. So as a result, money supply will decrease. So that's not the answer anyway, right? Fifth one, increase in the policy interest rate, SDFR and SLFR. In general, the interest rate is increased in the economy. So when the interest rate is increased in the economy, when the interest rate is increased, money supply decreases. And so this is also not the answer. Right. So if you go back to the main part of the question and read it consciously, the question asks us to recognize the option which will lead to an increase in money supply. So we have two such options. In the first one, money supply increases, and again from the third one also money supply increases. But look at the impact on the money supply from the first one. When the income tax rate is decreased, money supply increases slightly because currency held by the general public will increase. So that money supply increases, but slightly. But look at the third one. Open market purchase of securities by the central bank. See that now? When the central bank offers new cash to the commercial bank, right, the bank's excess reserves will increase. So this will definitely impact on these deposits as well, right? And when they offer loans using this new cash, again what happens? People obtain loans so that the currency held by the general public, even this component will increase. So from the third option, both the components get increased. So this will be the option which will increase the money supply by the highest amount. So for this question 31, the answer has to be the third one because they ask us to select the correct or the most appropriate. So from the two, the best one is the third one, right? Look at this 32. Which of the following is true about public goods? Okay, so with regard to public goods, we have only two main qualities. So let me write the two qualities. Public goods. On one side, we see that they are non-rivalry. And on the other side, we see that they are non-excludable. Non-excludable. Right. Now, what's non-rivalry? This means consumption by one person, right? Consumption of public goods by one person will not reduce the availability to others. So that's non-rivalry in simple terms. And what is non-excludability? Non-excludability means no possibility to remove non-paying users. If somebody is not paying the required price, it's impossible to exclude. It's impossible to remove those users from consuming this good. So that's non-excludability in simple terms. Right. Now, we will go through the 5 options that they have provided. One person's consumption means others get less. No, these are non-rival goods. So one person's consumption will not decrease the availability of the good to someone else. So this is wrong then. Consumers who do not pay for it can be excluded from its benefit. No, they are non-excludable. Third one more unit of public good for some consumers means one less unit for other consumers, which is very much similar to the first option. So this is also not the correct answer. One person's consumption does not exclude others from consuming it. Yes, that is non-rivalry. Right, so that's the answer then. And the fifth one says everyone pays the same price. No, nobody is going to pay the price as a result of this non-excludability or free rider problem. Right, come to this question 33. There we get, which of the following is true when the production of a certain good results in positive externalities, right? So let me draw you the graph and show you this thing. So when you draw the graph, let's say externalities, let's say positive externalities in production, right? Positive externalities in production. So we get the demand curve, and let's say initially this is the supply curve based on marginal private cost. And if there are positive externalities in production, right, marginal private cost is higher than the marginal social cost. So if you draw another curve, supply curve based on the marginal social cost, that will be on the right side because social cost is lower. So when the cost is lower, supply increases. So that this will be the marginal supply curve based on marginal social cost. Right, now look at this one. In black color, we see the market price and the market quantity. So market price and the market quantity. And in blue color, what do we see? we see the socially optimum price and the socially optimum quantity. So this is a situation that occurs in the market when there are positive externalities in production. And let me draw you another curve and show you what will happen to the diagram if there are positive externalities in consumption. Positive externalities in consumption, right? So this time we need to focus on the demand curve. So we have only one supply curve, and this is the demand curve based on marginal private benefit. And if there are positive externalities, the demand curve based on the marginal social benefit must be above the demand curve based on the marginal private benefit. Now let's see the situation in the market. This is the market price and this is the market quantity. But the socially optimum price is higher than the market price, and even the socially optimum quantity is higher than the market quantity. So this is a situation. So when there are positive externalities, right? When there are positive externalities, we can definitely say one thing. And what is that one thing? Market quantity is lower than the socially optimum quantity. Socially optimum quantity. But we can't comment on the price because if it is with regard to the positive externalities in production, definitely the market price will be higher than the socially optimum price. But if it's about the positive externalities in consumption, market price is lower than the socially optimum price. Right. ඒ නිසා quantity ගැන විතරයි මෙතන අපිට specifically certainly කියන්න පුළුවන්. Right. Then we will go through the options. Government must not provide that good. Who says? That's totally irrelevant and there's no meaning. Private sector production remains less than the socially desirable level. Private sector production means the market quantity. So market quantity is less than, lower than the socially optimum quantity. 100% true. And this is relevant for both. Positive externalities in production, positive externalities in consumption. Third one says market price of that good will be too high. Yes, it will be too high if it is related only to positive externalities in production. But if it is with regard to the positive externalities in consumption, it is not true. So that we can ignore this as well. Fourth says government must discourage the production. No, they should do the opposite. They should encourage. Private firms will not be able to maximize profits by providing that good. No, they will be able to maximize profits by producing those goods as well. No problem. Okay. Then the next question, 34. But before we move to this 34th one, we'll send all these to the other side. Right, now look at this 34th question. Crowding out effect describes which of the following? Okay, so this is something really interesting. So this is what happens in the crowding out effect. So the first thing, right, is having a budget deficit, right? Budget deficit. Imagine that the government is having a budget deficit, and as a result, what if, let's assume that they are trying to finance this budget deficit through domestic, right, banking sources. Domestic banking sources. And what happens when they try to finance the budget deficit from the domestic banking sources? We have a limited amount of funds. We have a limited amount of funds in commercial banks, right? There's a limit. We have a limited amount of funds in commercial banks. See, now there are two parties who are trying to obtain these funds as a loan. So one party is the government, right? They just try to finance their budget deficit from the available funds in the commercial banks. And the other party is the general public, if not the private investors, or maybe let's say the private sector, right? Private sector. So these two parties are competing with each other to obtain these funds. දැන් කලින් මේ වගේ ඒවා compete කර ඉන්නේ මේ private sector investors ලා 3-4 දෙනෙක් ඉන්නවා නම් ඒගොල්ලෝ තමයි try කරන්නේ මේ funds ගන්න. හැබැයි in this situation the entire private sector is competing with the government to obtain these funds. එතකොට this bank is a rational bank. එතකොට මොකද වෙන්නේ? Since they have a limited funds, they will increase the price of their funds. එතර බෑන්ක් එකේ ෆන්ඩ්ස් වල ප්‍රයිස් එක මොකක්ද? බෑන්ක් එකක් ඔයාට රුපියල් මෙච්චරක ලෝන් එකක් දුන්නොත් ඒගොල්ලෝ ඒ වෙනුවෙන් charge කරන price එක තමයි that's the interest rate. එතකොට since there's an excess demand for the available funds, the banks will increase interest rate. Right? The bank will increase interest rate because there's a huge demand for the funds. So they will obviously increase the interest rate. And as a result, what will happen? When the interest rates get increased in the economy, private sector investors, right? Private sector investors will be discouraged. සරලව ගත්තොත් එහෙම මෙයා බිස්නස් එකක් පටන් ගන්න ලෝන් එකක් ගන්නවා ලෝන් එකේ ඉන්ට්‍රස්ට් රේට් එක බැංක් එකකින් කියනවා 20% කියලා. හැබැයි මෙයා කරන්න හදන ප්‍රොඩක්ට් එක මෙයා මාකට් එකට ඉන්ට්‍රොඩියුස් කරන්න හදන ප්‍රොඩක්ට් එකෙන් එයාට තියෙන percentage එක profit percentage එක තමයි let's say 18%. ඉතින් එහෙමනම් බිස්නස් එක කරලා බෑ. It's not feasible. Right? Profit margin is 18%, but the interest rate is 20%. එතරම් loss එක. ඒ නිසා they will not be encouraged to do new investments to start new businesses. So this whole thing we recognize as the crowding out effect. And which option correctly describes this entire scenario that I explained to you? Look at the first one. When the government borrows money to finance budget deficit, okay, that's the first place. It competes with the private borrowers. Yes, it competes with the private sector investors and bids up the interest rate. See that now? That's true. When there is an excess demand from both private and government sectors, the interest rates will go up, causing private investments to decrease. 100% true. All right. So since that is the correct answer which describes the whole thing that I explained to you, I'm not going to go through these options. I hope that you understand the first one. Right. 35. Market failure occurs. Okay. So this is what I can tell you about the market failure. Market failure could be any situation where the market economy, right? It could be any situation where the market economy fails to achieve socially desirable outcome, right? Socially desirable outcome. So like in the previous situation, see the now. Okay, I think, okay, it's here. See, the socially desirable quantity of output is here, but the market achieves only this much of a quantity. And this is one example for market failure. But this is not the only example, right? But we can write that as the first one. So what has happened in that situation? Resource allocation is inefficient. In that given situation, resource allocation is inefficient. So this is just one situation where we experience this market failure. And what if income inequality is high? Then again we experience a market failure because the society will never expect this income inequality to increase. But we know if it's a market economic system, right, when the decision-making units make their own decisions based on their self-interest, this income inequality may increase. So that is another situation. And as a different example, I can tell you even the macroeconomic instability, right? is a situation where we see market failure, because these are not the socially desirable outcomes, but somehow based on the main qualities or based on how the market economic system works, right, we may experience these, and these situations we recognize as market failures. All right, then look at this 35, what's given to us in the question. Market failure occurs when, first one, firms contribute to incur heavy losses. Not just because one firm incur heavy losses, we don't really recognize that to be a market failure. It's not about the firms, it's about the entire economic system. That's the other thing, right? Firms cannot find markets for their product. That is a problem with their firm, right? Not a problem with the market economic system. Demand falls and firms are compelled to cut their production. No, that is again not a situation where we experience market failures. Prices rise and consumers find it difficult to meet their needs. No. And the fifth one says price mechanism does not allocate resources efficiency. This is, price mechanism, use of price mechanism is inherent quality in a free market economic system. And due to this inherent quality, we have a problem with regard to the resource allocation when it comes to specifically three goods. When it comes to public goods, merit goods, and demerit goods. And that is an inherent problem in the market economy, and that we recognize as a market failure. So answer is the fifth one. 36. The highest component of the government recurrent expenditure in Sri Lanka in this given year will not be relevant anymore for your A-level year. So we'll skip this one. 37. Main bilateral vendors of Sri Lanka, again at present. This will not be relevant to your A-level year. So we'll skip this one as well. 38. In 38, what do they give us? Read the question. Table below shows labor hours required to produce 1 unit of bicycles and 3-wheelers in Sri Lanka and India. See, now what do they give us? They give us the labor that is required. If not, in other words, we get this table based on the input approach, right? You get this entire table based on the input approach. What do we see inside the table? Inputs required to produce one output. And by looking at all these options, you can understand that it is with regard to absolute advantage and comparative advantage. So what is this absolute advantage? That is the country. The country with the highest productivity will have the absolute advantage in producing whatever that given good. Now in this case, if you just focus on the absolute advantage, since inputs are given to produce 1 unit of output, inputs aduma kotanada එතන තමා productivity එක වැඩිම. So when it comes to bicycles, which country uses lower number of inputs? See, India. And when it comes to 3-wheelers, again, which country uses the lowest amount of inputs? Again, India. So India has the absolute advantage for both products. But the first option says Sri Lanka has that. No, it's wrong. It's the opposite. Second one, India should specialize in bicycles and Sri Lanka should specialize in 3-wheelers. Okay, let's get into this thing after recognizing the opportunity costs. Right? එනිසා අපි මුලින්ම absolute advantage කතන්දර ටික ඉවර කළේ. Fourth one, Sri Lanka has absolute advantage in 3-wheelers. No, India has the absolute advantage in producing 3-wheelers as well. Right. එනිසා අපිට දැන් මේ දෙකම නෙමෙයි කියලා කියන්න පුළුවන්, but we can't select the correct answer from the remaining 3 options without calculating opportunity cost. But be careful, මම මේක හැමතිස්සෙම කියනවා, this is the input approach. So according to the input approach, when you calculate this opportunity cost of, let's say, good X, right? What's the equation? We use delta X over delta Y. So select one country first, India. If it's India, let's recognize this good to be bicycles to be good X and 3-wheelers to be good Y. Then delta X, it's 15 over delta Y. Remember, it's 60 because we are considering India first. So 15 over 60 will give you 0.25. And when it comes to 3-wheeler production in India, right, then the opportunity cost will be, it's 60 over 15, which is 4. Right, now come to Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka, what's the opportunity cost of producing a bicycle? It's again 20 over 120, which is 2 over 12, if not 1 over 6. 1 over 6 is how much? 0.16. 0.16. Let's say 0.167. And on the other side, what do we receive? That's 120 over 20, and that's just 6. Okay, see, where do we get the lowest opportunity cost for producing bicycles? The lowest opportunity cost for producing bicycles is with Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka has the comparative advantage in producing bicycles. And where do we get the comparative advantage, if not the lowest opportunity cost in producing three-wheelers? That's with India. So India has the comparative advantage in producing three-wheelers. You can pick the correct answer. Right, look at this one. India should specialize in bicycles. Is it true? India should specialize in no, three-wheelers. So this is wrong then. Third one says India has the comparative advantage in three-wheelers. Is that true? Yes, it is true. So that is the answer for this question 38. Right, look at this question 39 now. So this says, suppose that in the absence of any tariff, a domestic manufacturer using 15,000 worth of imported inputs manufactures and sells bicycles for rupees 25,000 per unit. The government imposes a 20% tariff on bicycles. An imported bicycle would now sell for rupees 30,000 per unit. What would be the effective rate of protection for domestically manufactured bicycles under this situation? Okay, the requirement is to calculate this effective rate of protection. Right, effective rate of protection is equal to, equation is V1 minus V0 over V0 into 100. And what is this V1? V1 is the domestic value addition under import tariff system. Under import tariff system. So how do we find this value addition GVA? It's the same equation that you use in unit 5. So you take the gross value of output. So from this gross value of output, you deduct the intermediary consumption. So you get the gross value added under import tariff system. So under the import tariff system, the producer can sell a bicycle for rupees 30,000. So that is the gross value of output, that's 30,000 minus intermediary consumption. There's no any tax involved for the raw material, so still the raw materials will cost only 15,000, so that the value addition under import tariff system is just 15,000. So we take 15,000 and we write it for V1. And what's V0? V0 is also the domestic value addition, but under free trade system, right? So we write now that is domestic value addition under free trade system. Under free trade system, right? Now under free trade system, the producer can sell. Again, we apply the same equation. Under the free trade system, the producer can sell the bicycles for rupees 25,000 and the intermediary consumption is 15,000. So that the gross value added will be just 10,000. So you put 10,000 here. So 15,000 minus 10,000 over, again we write 10,000 into 100. So it's simply 5,000 over 10,000 into 100, and answer is 50%. So for this question 39, answer is the fifth one. Right, look at this question 40. It says, at present, three major industrial, okay, at present. So we will not be discussing such questions because the answer may not be relevant to your A-level year. Right. So come to this question 41. Suppose an economy's terms of trade decline from base year 100 to 80. Which changes in the export price index and import price index would have caused this? Okay, so if you look at the equation of calculating these terms of trade, it is export price index over import price index multiplied by 100. So initially it is 100, which means export price index, if it is 100, import price index is also 100. So when you multiply this by 100, the output is 100. So this is the initial value of the terms of trade. But later on what has happened, this get decreased from 100 to 80. මේක හරිම සරල දෙයක්. මම අර කලින් පේපර් එකෙත් මේ කතන්දරේම කිව්වා. මම කලින් පේපර් එකේ ගත්ත එක්සැම්පල් එක වගේ අහපු දේ තමයි how much is 2 divided by 2 කියලා. ඒතර ඔයා කිව්වා 1 කියලා. මම ඒකෙන් mean කරන්නේ if both numerator and the denominator get the same value, the answer is 1. If it is multiplied by 100, then the answer will be 100. Right? එතකොට simply මෙතන වෙන්න ඕනි මොකද්ද? The new terms of trade value has to be 80 නේ. If it is 80, ඒකේ සරලම අදහස තමයි the value in the numerator is lower compared to the value in the denominator. And when you multiply this by 100, it will be lower. It will be a value lower than 100. However, if the opposite happens, if the value you receive for the numerator is greater than the value you receive in the denominator, then the value will be something greater than 100. ඉතින් දැන් මෙතන if they say that the new terms of trade value is 80, what needs to happen first? The value we receive in the numerator has to be lower than the value in the denominator. That's the first thing that should happen. So if you look at the first one, change in export price index is plus 20. So this has increased by 20 units, which means the new value is 120 in the export price index, and there's no change in the import price index, which is still 100. See, numerator's value is greater than the denominator's value. So this will definitely generate a value greater than 100. So you don't need to do this calculation. You can simply ignore that entire thing. Right. Then in the second one, export price index changes by 40 units, so that the new value is then 60. And here, this get increased by 20, so that import price index new value is 120. මේක නම් හරිම සරලයි. කියන අපිට මේක කරන්න ඕන. නමුත් කරන එකත් හරිම සරලයි. It is simply 60 divided by 120 into 100. This will give us 50%, which is also not the answer, because answer has to be 80. Right? But this gives us only 50. So this is not the answer. Right? And the third one, look at the third one. There, the new value of export price index is 90, because it has decreased by 10 units, and the new value of import price index is 120. Right? ඒතර ඒකත් අපි කරලා බලන්න ඕන. So 90 over 120. 90 over 120 will give you 75%. So it's 75%, which is again not the answer. But in the fourth one, export price index get decreased by 12 units, so that the new value is 88%, and import price index get increased by 10 units, so that is 110. So 88 over 110 will give you exactly 80%. So this is the answer. Last one again. Last one says export price index decreases from 4, which is 96, and import price index get decreased by 20, which is 80. See, in this case, like in the previous one, again the numerator's value is greater than the denominator's value, so this will definitely generate a value greater than 100. So this is not the answer. So based on these calculations, we can understand for this question 41, fourth is the answer. Right. Now look at this question 42. Australian government has donated 50 million worth food and medicine to Sri Lankan government. So this is a government transfer there. Australian government transfers 50 million worth food and medicine to Sri Lankan government. Anitaka tamai, look at the goods that they transfer. food and medicine, they are current, right? Current transfer. This is a current transfer that happens from one government to another. So where do we record these current transfers? Generally, we record the current transfers in secondary income account, right? Secondary income account. And if it is just 50 million rupees, we could have debited that amount to the currency and deposits account, right? We debit it there and we record the credit entry in the secondary income account. But the problem, this is not just a transfer of 50 million, not a cash transfer, right? Here, food and medicine is transferred. Insa food and medicine goods, visible goods, insa which account should be debited? We should debit goods and services account, if not trade account, right? We should debit trade account. And in the trade account, we record goods, visible goods. So that is debited. And then we should credit this thing into secondary income account because that's where we record all the transfers. Secondary income account is credited. And the credit entry, we get the credit entry first. The credit entry goes to the secondary income account. So either this or maybe this. And the debit entry goes to, yeah, see, not to the financial account, but to the goods and services account. So the correct answer for this question 42 is this second one. Right, 43. Look at this one. It says, in a flexible exchange rate system, an increase in foreign demand for domestic goods. See, these are the curves related. We get the quantity of rupees and then we get the price of a rupee in dollars. Okay, so this is the rupee demand curve and this is the rupee supply curve. And what happens in the foreign market? The demand for domestic goods increases. These foreigners demand more and more locally produced Sri Lankan goods. How do they purchase these Sri Lankan goods? They give dollars and they ask for rupees, and by paying in rupees they will purchase domestic goods. And then what will happen to when they ask for Sri Lankan rupees more and more? What will happen to Sri Lankan rupee demand? Rupee demand will increase. So this is the new demand curve for Sri Lankan rupees, and as a result of increase in Sri Lankan rupees, what happens in the market? See, the price in terms of dollars, let's assume that to be just $1 previously and the quantity, let's say 10,000 rupees. And now what happens? The quantity increases, even the price get increased, right? Both quantity and price get increased. And see that now the foreign value of a rupee has increased, so that we recognize that as an appreciation of rupee. So rupee get appreciate. So what's the answer then? Increased demand for domestic currency. Yes. Creating a depreciation. No, it is an appreciation because the foreign value of domestic currency has increased. Reduced demand. Wrong. Increased demand for domestic currency. Correct. Creating an appreciation of domestic currency. Yes. 43. Third is the answer. Right. So අනිත් දෙකම ගන්න බෑ. මොකද reduced demand කියලානේ කියන්නේ supply එකට impact එකක් නැහැ. Demand එක තමයි ප්‍රශ්න. Right. Then look at this question 44. What is the main role of this IMF? What's the main role? We had the same question in a previous paper as well. එතකොට කතන්දරේ තමයි, the main role of IMF is to support the countries who are facing the problems in the balance of payment. The answer is very clear. It has to be the first one. Ensuring the stable exchange rate regime, just to make the exchange rate stable, and provide emergency financial assistance to countries facing crisis in balance of payments. And that's exactly what happened to Sri Lanka. Right, so that is very well recognized fact. Inisa, answer for this question 44 is the first one. Right, 45. Which of the following would reduce economic growth? What is economic growth? Economic growth is this continuous rightward shift of the PPC. Now, reducing economic growth means there would be either a leftward shift of the PPC. If not, this given point should avoid PPC shifting to the right side. ඔය දෙක තමයි වෙන්න ඕනේ. එක්ක leftward shift එකක් තියෙනවා නැත්නම් rightward shift එක නවත්තන්න. Right. First one, decline in investment. Clear? Decline in investment means when the amount that we spend for investments get decreased, our capital resources get decreased. Decrease නොවුනත් capital resources increase වෙන එක නවතිනවා. Increase වෙන එක නවතිනවා නම් capital resources increase නොවි we can't expect an economic growth. Right? We can expect this. Answer is this itself. A decline in investments will reduce economic growth. Second one says increase in the number of immigrants from abroad. See, when we receive more and more, when we get more and more immigrants, our labor force increases, and as a result, PPC gets shifted to the right side, and this will be a reason, this could be a reason for the economic growth. Technological advancement, due to technological advancements also, the PPC may shift to the right side. Fourth one, increase in the labor force. See, that's what I explained in the second option. So it may be a reason for a rightward shift of the PPC. Fifth one, increase in the savings rate. See, when you save more, you have more funds to invest. When you invest more, capital resources get increased, and as a result, PPC gets shifted to the right side. So answer for this question 45 is the first one. Right, look at this 46th one. Development. We had this exact, I think, same thing in a previous paper as well. එතකොට හැබැයි ප්‍රශ්නේ තියෙන්නේ previous paper එකේ මට මතක විදිහට හරියට මතක නැහැ but මම කියන කතන්දරය තමයි when it comes to development it's always both quantitative and qualitative. In so qualitative improvement, just a mere qualitative improvement will not ensure development. It's a quantitative and qualitative. Become well known. First one, sustainable increase in gross national income focuses only on quantitative improvement, so it's not development. Removal of income disparity of rural population is related to income inequality, not directly related to quantitative and qualitative improvements of human life. Third one, economic growth with changes in economic structure. See, economic growth is somewhat quantitative and changes in economic structure is somewhat qualitative. So we could consider this to be the answer. And then the next one says, fourth one, increase in country's real gross domestic product. No, that is again quantitative, only quantitative. So it's not the answer. Fifth one says improvement in the average citizen's quality of life. See, this is the direct definition of development, right? The quality of life changing from an unfavorable situation to a favorable situation. Enisa, from these two, if you compare the answer, the most suitable answer from this list is the fifth one, because in the fifth option, we see the precise definition of development. Right. 47th. Which of the following policies is most likely to make countries' income distribution more equitable? Income distribution more equitable. Right. First one, establishing a general sales tax on food and clothing. See, a general sales tax on food and clothing is more, often those are regressive taxes, indirect. If we have more and more regressive taxes, income distribution will be much more unequal, right? So we can't consider this to be the answer there. Establishing progressive income tax system. See, among regressive taxes, indirect taxes, those will increase the inequality. But if it's a progressive tax, yeah, it will ensure equitable income distribution. Third one, eliminating excise taxes on luxury goods, which is not anyway fair. This will again increase the inequality in income distribution. Proportionately decreasing the tax rate for all income groups. See, decreasing the tax rate proportionately for all the income groups will not ensure that the income is distributed equally. දැන් ඔයා නිකමට හිතලා බලන්නකෝ ලකුණු තියෙනවා ළමයින්ගේ මේ කීයක් හරි අපි හිතමු දැන් අඩුම ළමයා 80 අරගෙන තියෙනවා ක්ලාස් එකේ ඊට පස්සේ 82 අරගෙන තියෙනවා ඊට පස්සේ 84 අරගෙන තියෙනවා 86 අරගෙන තියෙනවා ටීචර් කියනවා රයිට් එක ප්‍රශ්නයක් වැරදිලා තමයි ඔයගලන්ට හරි දීලා තියෙන්නේ ඒ නිසා හැම එකකින්ම අපි ලකුණු දෙක ගානේ අඩු කරමු කියලා. දැන් ලකුණු දෙක ගානේ අඩු කළාට පස්සේ what happens? Nothing happens to the disparity. The disparity is still the same. ඔයා මේ ඉලක්කම් දෙකේ range එක අරගෙන බලුවොත් range එක 6 මේ ඉලක්කම් දෙකේ range එක බලුවොත් that is still 6. So proportionately decrease in this thing will never change the disparity. Disparity is still there. So this is also wrong. Fifth one, reducing subsidy on education and health, which will again increase inequality, not equality. So this is ignorable. Answer for this 47th is the second one. 48. Which of the following combinations correctly indicates national poverty headcount index and the district? Okay, so this is with regard to the values into 2019. So I'm not going to discuss this because the answer may not relevant for the given A-level year, your A-level year. So we'll skip this one. 49. Which of the following is the correct calculation of labor force participation rate? So what's the labor force participation rate equation? We simply take labor force, right? We take labor force, we divide it by working age population and we multiply this by 100. And labor force we can calculate using, based on this, see, when you take the total of employed and unemployed population, we get the labor force. So that is divided by the working age population multiplied by 100 is the correct equation for calculating labor force participation ratio. Right. 50th, despite the fact that Sri Lanka had engaged in 16 programs, then Y level with IMF in the past, respective governments had failed to implement the most programs successfully, mainly due to we have taken the help 16 times so far, but why the governments failed to implement most of the programs successfully? Why? The answer is very simple. Answer is this: lack of commitment in meeting the aggregate reforms. ගිහින් කතා කරලා එනවා ඊට පස්සේ ඇවිල්ලා වෙන මොකක් හරි එකක් කරනවා. So that's the reason. So it's easy. So this first one itself is the answer for this question 50.